A couple of weeks ago, I did a blog. I was really nervous about it, and I said, my journey of faith, I thought God was done with me. And I received a ton of messaging from people who really found it to be encouraging. And I thought, man, I can't just do one. So periodically, I'm going to continue the series. Now, I know some of you don't come from faith, and you're not going to have any condemnation or self-righteous judgment from me. These may still help you. They may not help you because you don't subscribe to that worldview, and I get it. I always throw out a disclaimer that just says this one is going to be pretty heavily filled with spiritual overtones. So you can stay or you can go. It's certainly not going to offend me, but I don't want you to feel like you're having something pushed on you, because that's the last thing that you need in your situation. But this one is about feeling like I was a disappointment to God. I'll tell you a funny story. I was at an EMS weekend about a year after we went to our EMS weekend. And so Rick asked us to come back and tell our story because it is pretty outrageous, and it helps normalize things for people, and it helps put people at ease at the EMS weekend. And when you come to an EMS weekend, there is a mentor couple that will share their story and share what it's like to be, a year, 2, 5, maybe even 10 years out. And so it was our time to tell our story. Now I'm laughing because we came, Samantha and I were telling our story, but then you get to stay for the entirety of the weekend. So we were there, and a gentleman was speaking just in this little breakout session. And I was there listening, and he said, for those of you that come from faith, I want to share a couple thoughts with you. And he talked about how we can feel like we're a disappointment to God. And he looked right at me, and he said, Samuel, do you feel like a disappointment to God? Now, I think secretly in the back of his mind, he thought I was maybe healthier than I really was. So I think he was hoping that I was going to say, well, no, because, and rattle off this big theological answer of how, no, I'm not a disappointment to God at all because of X, Y, and Z. But he looked at me and he said, Samuel, do you feel like a disappointment to God? And I kind of looked around like, well, absolutely. Don't you? And after hearing my story last night, don't you think I should feel like a complete failure, a complete expletive, a complete disappointment to God? And then he looked at me, and I think he was a little bit caught off guard that he was like, uh-oh. And so he really dug deep in his theological understanding, because I think he wanted to really make sure that the outside people also got this, because here's someone who's sharing their story, and he hasn't gotten it. And he said, Samuel, let me tell you something. To be a disappointment to God, you have to shock God. You have to be capable of catching God by surprise. You have to be able to reveal information that God didn't know was going to happen. You have to be able to shock the all-knowing, immutable, sovereign God with new information. You didn't do that. God knew what he was getting when he opened up your eyes and your heart. God knew what he was getting when he chose to save you. You are not a disappointment to God because you would have to be able to shock God. You would have to be able to catch God by surprise. You'd have to be able to catch God when he's not looking. And I'm sorry, you're not that good, Samuel. You're not that powerful. You are not a disappointment to God. He knew that you were going to do this. He didn't want it to happen. He didn't author it. This isn't what God wanted, but yet he knew that you would do it, and he still saved you. He still loved you anyway. And so in the middle of this EMS weekend, here's the mentor couple crying while he's writing down notes in this life-changing moment. That moment was a moment where I really felt this feeling of being set free from this weight that I had been carrying ever since D-Day happened. It was a freedom moment, if you will, where I was like, man, you mean I'm not a disappointment? Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not trying to preach this easy believism. We can, by all means, the Bible's very clear, and it says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit. So I believe that I grieved God, and at some level, one could make the statement that that's worse than being a disappointment, but I don't want to get into that. I want to get into the fact that, man, I really had to wrestle with the fact that, yes, I had grieved God. But it was funny. In this moment, I was being really released from this shame and this condemnation and this deception, understanding that I had grieved the Lord, but yet we were a year down the road and our life had so much joy and so much healing and so much redemption that it was kind of a moment where I was elated, but yet I was weeping. Like I was weeping that I had grieved God so much, but yet I had already wept so much. I was feeling this sense of freedom and elation at the fact that, wait a minute, God knew what I was going to do. He still chose me, though He knew I was going to screw up so bad, though He knew I was going to do all these ridiculous things, yet He loved me enough to open up my eyes. And that doesn't let me off the hook. It teaches me humility, that what a basket case I am, what a failure that I am, what a complete disappointment I have been to thousands of people. I was not and am not a disappointment to God the Father, and neither are you today, right where you sit, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been. The things that you have done, unfortunately, have probably devastated the people most important to you. But I want to tell you, you are not a disappointment to God. One of the best things that you can do is embrace the fact of what you've done and realize, I think it's Psalm 18 that says, you know what, He rescued me because He delighted in me. And though your world is falling apart, and though you don't know if you're going to remain married, and though everything is completely a train wreck, I want to tell you that this might be, in fact, I know it is, God rescuing you. Me being exposed was rescuing me. It was rescuing me from more days, weeks, months, and years of hypocrisy and devastation. And it doesn't feel like you're being rescued. I know that. It feels like you're being judged and condemned. But I want to tell you, in the theology of the true Christ, He's rescuing you from doing any more damage, from hurting any more people, from leaving you to yourself. One of the best ways that God rescues us is He saves us from ourselves. You are not a disappointment. You still have life. You still have a calling. God is not done with you. God has not washed His hands of you. And if God has not washed His hands of you, you need to not wash your hands of yourself. You've got to come back to the one that has your redemption, has your healing, that still has plans for you. He has rescued you and is rescuing you because He delights in you.